Hello! Ho ho ho! It's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today we continue with the third turn of the Shadow Tech Goddess, Stenibelle. When last we visited this crazy adventure, Stenibelle had at last made her way via the Marian's Road onto the George Parr in space. Not a easy feat, but when you have the arcane at your disposal, I suppose anything is possible. Now, if you noticed, there was a lot of CYA in the last chapter. There is nothing that derails a story more than a good old-fashioned drive a truck through plot hole. Really takes the reader or the viewer or whatever out of the experience and turns them from a eager follower into a bloody skeptic. And once you have one plot hole, the effect becomes cumulative. People start looking for them. It's just like in football. They say the best way to not fumble the football is to not fumble the football. If you get the reputation for being a fumbler, then you're done. Everyone, when they try to attack you, is just going to go for the ball, and that's going to beget more fumbling. So you have a plot hole, and that's going to get all the bloodhounds out there, and they're going to find more. So Aram had to put the kibosh on some of these potential plot holes. So here we go. Let me answer the plot hole questions for you. So Stenibelle is going to be infiltrating the George Parr via the arcane Marian's Road, a road that can conceivably deposit her anywhere. So why would they then deposit her in the middle of a corridor in the aft of the ship? Why would they just put her like somewhere where there's a terminal, like right in front of a terminal, so she can just log in? She'll be undercover, for one thing. Log in, make her comm to Professor Sherlock, because that's important, because she wants to get her sister's cash back, and give her a base of operations as she begins her information gathering process. No, instead she's deposited right in the middle of a corridor in the back of the ship. And that's because, as Aram explains, Lady Alesta can only put her into places where she's seen with her own eyes. So the only thing really in the ship she's seen is Deck 4. So that puts an end to that one. And then it's like, well, Stenibelle is a master lock picker. Why doesn't she just pick the locks of the nearest crew billet, go in and make her comm and set up her base of operations? Well, because if she picks a lock, it's going to set an alarm off in the bridge, and then it's going to be on, because Stenibelle is basically all by herself on a ship full of armed fleet personnel whose intentions are unknown, whose level of sanity is unknown, as their captain, Captain Duval of Wilshire, is gunning to put an end to the universe, right? So who knows what would happen to her should she be caught. Stealth is her best defense, and therefore she can't just pick a lock willy to nilly. When she discovers the poor lady Lessa of the Walpole in a box in the hold, why didn't she just chop her hand off and take it with her? Why go through all the trouble of dragging her into her billet? And I even said, if she was still bunged up, that's what she would have done. But Stenibelle is a conscientious person. She's not just going to chop somebody's hand off and take it with her. That it goes against her moral code. She's not going to do it. So there was a lot of the paving of plot holes, of putting the kibosh on them before they can grow and fester. We also had a touching scene as Stenibelle goes before Captain Gwendolyn and apologizes for beating the crap out of her on planetfall. And Stenibelle does in fact discover that there is a connection between her and Lieutenant Gwendolyn. It's a small one. It's an arcane one. It's not a sexual one. She's not turned on by Lieutenant Gwendolyn, but she feels a deep connection. One that spans the universe, spans time and space. She gives her watch back, and her heart goes out to her as she can see that this poor woman is all alone. She feels not remorse or guilt, but she feels that aloneness. This week, Chapter 8, crew in Limbo. We get down to it. We're going to meet some of the major players, and we're going to see how this shakes loose. A couple of fun facts. The George Parr and Captain Duval are all related in the real world, and there's a reason that I picked those names. It all comes down from my heritage, from my family history. I'm not really gonna say anymore, but there's a reason why I gave the bad guys these names. Oh well, just a fun fact. In any event, let's proceed immediately. This is a longer sort of chapter, so let's get down to it. Chapter 8, Crew in Limbo. Now that was out of the way and Calamy had her meager assets restored to her, it was time to make some headway regarding this mystery. Captain Duval's quarters would be located in the executive wing near the bridge, Deck 2. Another sound came from the bathroom. Perhaps the crewman was waking up. She drew her Grenville 40 and went in. The crewman had managed to somehow turn on the water and crawl partially out of the shower, was slumped face down on the tiles. Stenibelle turned off the water and knelt down to check her. She was sopping wet, her hair drenched. She turned her over. Her body was freezing from the cold water in the shower, but behind the topical cold was the roaring heat of her body threatening to reassert itself. The crewman was still unconscious, yet she must have come to at least for a moment, as her left hand was partially thrust into her pocket. Stenibelle carefully pulled her hand out. A data crystal nestled in her limp fingers clattered to the floor. Standing over the fallen crewman, Stenibelle was reminded of Gwendolyn lying bloody on the cold metal street of Planetfall. The sounds of Gwendolyn weeping behind the metal door passed into her thoughts, haunting them. "I'm so sorry, Gwen." As she stood, she began having the first vague notions of feeling sorry for the poor crewman. She hadn't intended to interact with the crew at all, but here she was, sopping wet in front of her. And, for that matter, what was wrong with her? She was not asleep, and, had she been mildly drugged, the cold water should have rousted her out. Damn! She dragged the girl from the bathroom and wrangled her into bed. She stripped and dried her with a towel. She checked her closet. Several changes of clothing hung from a rack, along with a few uniforms, boots, and shoes neatly arranged in a pigeonhole waiter, and a plump terry-cloth robe. An elaborate float camera sat on the floor, turned off and forgotten. She fetched the robe to keep her from catching a chill. Her mission aboard this ship was clear, but her mother had taught her to be curious and to puzzle out a pressing problem until it was solved. Something sinister was at work aboard this ship, and she had to know what she was dealing with. Perhaps, had she still been wearing her bolabungs, she wouldn't have cared. She was here for the data, for a camera, and the well-being of her house, not the crew. But the bolabungs were gone, and thankfully so, and Stenibelle's heart spoke. Help this person, if you can. She went through the crewman's drawers and closet. She found her fleet ID, Crewman Standard Lessa of Tharpely, Lady of the Omnaris House of Walpole, and a junior assistant in the ship's AV department. The Professor's Cyril Cone information was spot on. She wondered about the creepy guy she'd imprisoned in the hold. There was no Cyril information on him at all. Why? Moving on, she checked her drawers for evidence of drugs, arcane tinctures or salves. Nothing. She went back into the bathroom to check her medicine chest and kicked the data crystal across the floor. The crystal. It must mean something to her. She had it in her pocket, and she had, if only for a moment, revived a bit and sought it out. Stenibelle got the Unimind. Tiny legs came out and seized the crystal, moving it around. A holographic cone came up and the data came through. It was a vast collection of photos and vids, showing a smiling Lady Lessa with her friends. There she was, waving, apparently quite gregarious, making ample use of her free time. Some of her friends in the pictures were fleet crewmen like she was. There were a long series of pictures of herself on baths by the beaches, splashing in the warm water with her pant legs rolled up, sampling the local hot fare, trying on lacy baths clothing in the marketplaces, and making silly faces for the camera with her friends. Ah, look here! Frequent photos of herself and a handsome gentleman, himself also a fleet crewman. There they were, swimming together, shopping in the bath's sunshine, him bogged down with packages, him hand-feeding her something red and unbearably hot at a cafe. Here was a photo of Lady Lessa wearing a floppy hat while in the gentleman's embrace. They appeared to be sharing a kiss, though the brim of her hat covered their faces from the camera's eye. So, here she seemed a perfectly vivacious young lady with a love of camaraderie and picture-taking, enjoying the sights and ports of call her fleet duty brought her to, and also enjoying the company of a young man. So what happened? How had she ended up in a container in the hold, like a cargo full of spoiled meat? She checked the date stamp on the photos. They went back several years, with numerous photos and vids being taken at a steady, regular interval. The most recent picture was taken several weeks prior, and then they stopped altogether. Nothing more. The last picture was interesting. Lessa had taken a photo of a procession of strange, robed, slightly stunted people filing out of the Ripcar Bay. Looking at the photo, the robed people had an ominous presence. Their skin, what little of it she could see, had an orange hue. That was the last image before the end-of-file marker. The Unimine released the crystal, and Stenibelle returned it to her HRN. Something terrible had happened since the last picture was taken, and Stenibelle had to assume that all the rest of the containers she saw in the hold also contained crewmen in a similar state. Stenibelle checked crewman Lessa again. Her temperature appeared to be quite high. Stenibelle guessed she had a fever of 102 to 104. She checked her for signs of drugging or poisoning. No drooling, which sometimes happen. No odd smells or aromas. Her breathing was nice and steady. Her heartbeat, however, was troubling. Her heart was racing. She shook her hand and produced a pinky, placing it into her palm. The effects of the pinky should calm her system and slow her heart rate a little bit. Without the pinky, her heart might have run away to over 200 beats a minute. An accelerated heartbeat was a clear symptom of being under the influence of a spell. Looking further, Lessa had on no arcane jewelry or trinkets that might have locked her into a spell. No bolabungs. Using her thumbs, she lifted one of her eyelids. Her pupils were unresponsive to light. She was, without question, under the influence of something external. Look here. She bore an odd black tattoo on her left shoulder, which appeared to be of arcane origins. It was composed of twisting lines, dots, and intersecting points. Her training told her that tattoos could be used to impart a spell upon a person. The ink used could have had certain effects. The ceremonies enacted while the tattoo was being inked in, and the pattern of the tattoo itself could be significant. She leaned down and sniffed the tattoo. A slight smell of rot. She used the Unimind and consulted Lady Lessa's photo and vid collection again. She was looking for a shot of her bare left shoulder to see if that tattoo had been there previously. There, a set of shots with her splashing in the aqua waters of baths wearing a colorful swimsuit. No tattoo. Stenibelle went over her with her arcane kit of holy stones and various other detectors. She was found to not have been to the astral plane, nor had she been exposed to any of the more obvious ingredients used in arcane rituals. She did not read as a magical creature herself, but Stenibelle's Shadowtech detector went utterly wild, so much so it cracked in her hand. This poor woman was saturated in Shadowtech, and possibly more than enough to be rendered fatally toxic. Predictably, the Shadowtech came from the tattoo on her left shoulder. What had Morgan Juderick said? That the George Parr had been befouled with Shadowtech, and here it was, slowly killing the girl. The Unimind jumped back into her coat. So there it was. This woman, and possibly most of the regular crew with her, were bespelled. She grappled with herself for a moment. What to do? She needed the camera data, but this poor crewman required assisting. What could she do? She wasn't a hospitaller, and her knowledge of shadow tech was minimal at best. If she attempted to treat Lady Lessa and got it wrong, she could end up killing her. And what about the rest of them down in the hold? She was only one person. She couldn't watch over them all. Time was wasting. I know. I'll get the data, and once I have it, I can use it to ask Professor Sherlamp for assistance. I'll refuse to give it to her unless she relents. She might know what to do, or she could recommend a wise course of action. She could get help. That seemed to be the best plan. Get the data as quickly as possible, and then force Professor Sherlamp to do something, anything, for the crew. Leaving Lady Lessa wrapped up in her robe on the bed, Stenibelle exited the room and tricked the lock so she could re-enter without having to pick it. She snuck away down the empty corridor, the serocone data steadily ratcheting through her brain. Captain Duval, Deck 2, Officer's Wing, accessible via the executive lift at Junction 4. She moved down the long corridor, knowing exactly where she needed to go. Junction 4 will be, from her current position, 200 feet forward. There were many lifts dotting the deck, but only 3 went to the bridge, and only 1 went to the officer's wing. This one, right here, the executive lift, its doors innocently clam-shelled shut. There was a palm lock keeping the riffraff out. The Cyril hammered away information. Use access door L76 to enter the lift shaft and climb up. She found the panel and opened it, revealing a small maintenance crawlway leading to the yawning open space of the lift shaft. A locked grate barred her entrance. It was a magneto lock requiring a hydraulic key and was unnetworked. She could pick it and nobody on the bridge would know a thing, though the lock would require more force than a human pair of hands could manage, even with the gift of strength. Out came her vuncula. The battle club opened and latched on. After a few moments of work, she had twisted it open. She squirmed in and was soon climbing the rungs upward towards Deck 2, the vuncula clamping on tight with a metal deforming clunk, hauling her up fast. As she neared Deck 3, the abandoned silence of the ship was lost, replaced with a frenetic howl of noise. Rough, beatless music highlighted with pervasive clouds of moans and aggressive chatter drifting through the lift door, mixed with the delicate crystalline tinkling of glass breaking and loose items being tossed around. As she passed Deck 3, she smelled the acrid notes of cigarette and menthol smoke, the harsh, cheap kind from Baz. She also smelled the lurking, galling stench of urine and the flat, tired aroma of stale beer soaked in the carpeting. It was as if the entire ship was abandoned except for Deck 3, which was densely populated by barbarians having a rave. Deck 3 forward for the Cyril was for officers and the heads of section. What were the officers doing? The access panel was there nearby. She decided to take a quick peek. Pushing through into the brightly lit hallway, a dismal scene unfolded before her. There was rubbish tossed about, empty bottles, crumpled papers, half-eaten meals, and other flotsam. The walls were gouged. Graffiti was painted. People rolled about in drunken and cooped-up stupors. As with the ghoulish man in the hold, these were all filthy and nightmarish personages dressed in fleet uniforms. There were shifty, horrid men and painted, teased-up women, barbed and pierced, some with 4D tattoos pointing at their privates and flashing. None of the lot registered her Cyril data. It was quiet, giving her some momentary privacy with her own thoughts. The regular crew was replaced by a pack of filthy disreputables for reasons unknown. She had no idea how or why such a thing could have happened. She pulled back into the lift shaft and continued upwards. She reached Deck 2, skirting around the lift car that was suspended there. She found the maintenance crawl, faded into the shadows, and squeezed into the environs of Deck 2. In contrast to the lower decks, which were rather utilitarian, it was quite opulent. Fine wood paneling all around, corniced framing, and expensive Hoban tiles lined the floor. A gallery of fine oil paintings depicting the busts of majestic, well-dressed, unsmiling people wigged in the Remnath fashion were lit by golden lamps. Subdued Remnath string music played over the intercom, droning out all hint of the barbarism going on below. In Deck 3, the Cyril was back, slapping her in the sinuses, load-packing her mind with information. She drifted in and went to the captain's door. She heard notes of quiet conversation within. She rapped on the door, hoping he would answer and she could drift in. Time to come face to face with this fellow. The talking within ceased. A moment later, the door swung open a crack. "Who's there?" came a voice. The door opened fully and a tall woman came out with dark blue hair. She looked up and down the corridor, perplexed. "Who's there?" she asked again in an accented voice. More Cyril Cone information assaulted her headspace. Lieutenant Rem Deckard, first officer and graduate of Traveler, a school for women. Her birthplace was listed as Deckard Continent, Planetfall. However, Professor Sherlamp disputed that. The Professor's Cyril information stated instead that Deckard was a Fomora from Modron, a hellish place if ever there was one, and that she was extremely dangerous. Her appearance didn't betray anything of the sort. She was tall and pretty with a stately face, her blue hair pulled back and tied. She was wearing a full fleet uniform, dark blue coat, frilly white shirt, pants, and deep falloon boots. Quite a bit different from the more ladylike Tremblar uniform Gwendolyn wore. Her hands, emerging from the frills and felt, were delicate and feminine. Stealing her nerves, Stenibelle drifted past her and entered the room as the woman closed the door behind her. Success! She was in. The room inside was equally as luxurious as the corridor. The far wall was rim-shot with windows looking out on the starry night of open space, studded with the panning light cones from the sensing nodes of the ship. Grand couches and fine wood tables were arranged in the interior of the room astride rugs and rich carpets. Trays of biscuits, cheeses, and porcelain pots steaming with scented tea and coffee sat on the tables. Tea and coffee, very cultured and reasonable, unlike the spilt beer and cigarette stench down below. Centered on the interior wall was a full-length framed portrait depicting a turbid black scene. Layers upon layers of black. It looked like Shadowtech to Stenibelle. Standing in the center of the Shadowtech was a tall, slender female wearing a tight-fitting black costume like an oilskin. The figure was wearing a spherical helmet of some sort, with the front portion of the spear cut away, revealing her face. She had a fair face with sharp pencil-like features. Over her eyes she wore a protruding pair of brass or gold geared goggles. She also wore a great cape that seemed to be made out of Shadowtech as well. The painting was oddly lurid and disquieting. Things seemed to move. The woman's goggled eyes seemed to follow her. Two men were sitting at couches in the center of the room. One was a slim, tallish fellow in a tailored fleet uniform brimming with ivy and stars. He had a sallow face and light blonde hair mixed with wisps of thoughtful Remnath gray. Cyril Cone teletype flash-wired across her thoughts and embossed themselves. She'd never met the man before, but she knew exactly who he was. Captain Duval, Lord of Wilshire, from the Wiln area of Remnath. The information Hannah Ben Sherlamp had given her were complete, both the good and the bad. Captain Duval, 4th Lord of Wilshire of the current line, a fleet captain in his 10th appointment to the chair of the George Parr, child prodigy with the oboe. Studied political science at the University of Mercia, was a first-rate brantball player, winger position. Hero of the Battle of Sarander Quo, society man, married to a debutante from Falls, his second wife, programmability Alindi, churchgoer, frequent donor to charitable causes, anarchist, murdered a man once for a miter slight and hid his body, frequent adulterer, especially with his first officer, Rem Deckard, trafficker in women and children and human flesh, member of the Nihilus of Punt, stated goal, destruction of the universe. A churchgoer and a murderer who would see the end of all things, and here he was, right in front of her, drinking tea on a couch. The man sitting across from him reminded Stenibelle of a pig. At first glance, he seemed rather handsome and striking, but it faded quickly. He had a round, unappealing face and a small, blunt nose, and wore a black suit of odd manufacture. She, too, knew exactly who he was. Rodrigo of Bergen, a Zaffin warlord sitting in comfort aboard a fleet ship, an offense that would have Captain Duval off his chair and firmly in prison should it ever come out. His face was on the Zaffin wall back at the fleet, granting permission for any personnel to assassinate him without question. Rodrigo of Bergen drank from a cup of tea that he regularly enhanced with a thick, dark red liquid poured from a flask. Hannah Ben Sherlimp had a wealth of information on him as well, pounded out in blaring Serral information. Zaffin warlord from Midas and titular head of the court of Bergen. Occasional lover of Camilla of Sorander, another infamous Zaffin potentate. Suspected of cannibalism, confirmed by the professor's information. Suspected Zaffin Kabbalist, again confirmed. Nihilist of Punt. Sitting next to Bergen was a slender woman wearing a dark cranberry robe printed with tiny, colorful flowers. Her long legs and feet were bare, tucked up underneath her waist. Is she wearing any knickers? Stenibelle wondered. It didn't look like it. Her fawn-colored hair, shiny and well-tended, was pulled back from her face and held in place with several jeweled combs. A sequined headband ran across her forehead. She sat perfectly still, eyes closed, as if in a deep trance, the rise and fall of her breast nearly imperceptible. Stenibelle guessed if she stood up, this woman, even shoeless, would be of exceptional height, much taller than herself or even Gwendolyn. She held her right hand to her breast, fingers contorted into an uncomfortable bent extended position. Her left hand was stretched out towards Bergen's, the pads of her fingers lightly touching and breezing across his wrist in a minute but hypnotic pattern. Bergen's wrist and arm reacted slightly to her touches, goosing up, his sinews pulling taut like a lute string, plucked into slow passion by them. Stenibelle received additional Serral Cone information. Melazar of Caroline, 25th daughter in the court of Wilhelmina. She had one father and 10 mothers. A Zaffin custom of gene splicing from a number of donors was practiced often on Caroline. She had inherited familial giantism, as was common with the Carolines, and her height was listed as 77 Betelgeuse, or in league terms, 7 feet 1 inch. Her weight, a whopping 300 pounds. 300 pounds? Stenibelle marveled. Melazar was long and skinny. The weight must all be bone and muscle. More information. A Zaffin tropist capable of inducing pleasure with the slightest touch and bound to the court of Bergen for the last 20 years. And, according to Aram and Alesta, she was an extraplanar entity known as a Merton, possessing the critical data she needed. There she was. Now how to get at the data. Around her, droll conversation unfolded. "Who was at the door?" Captain Duval asked. Nobody was there. The corridor was empty, Rem Deckard replied, resuming her seat. "I distinctly heard a knock." "As did I," Rodrigo said. "Probably one of those barley-coated knockabouts you have manning the ship. Had I known of your pressing need for manpower, I'd have brought my own hand-picked crew." Rem Deckard turned a slight shade of red. "Ha! A bunch of Zaffins manning a fleet sprint ship? That'll be a bad day indeed." Duval interjected. "I determine who is placed in key positions on my ship, dear Bergen. Let us not forget that. These people have their uses, and when that time is past, they shall suffer the same fate as those who preceded them. None shall be missed, I assure you." "Not the women. We need the women," Bergen replied. "Yes, quite." Duval took a sip of his tea and stared at the ominous painting hanging on the wall. "So what news? I am eager to get underway. I shall sneak out of the League and return a destroyer with the Shadowtech goddess at my side, wiping clean this place and remaking it as I see fit. Bergen became annoyed. How many times must I tell you? This process takes time. Rem Deckard was skeptical. Time we don't have, Bergen. We could be boarded by the fleet for inspections, summoned by an admiral, or compelled away on some errant quest. We cannot hide what we have done here forever. I thought we would be out of the League by now. You boasted we would be. Bergen retorted. Just a little more time. The women you have given me are weak in Shadowtech, like a basket full of turnips. Good Zaffin women are much better at yielding Shadowtech. Once we have enough, we will know the location of Camera, and we may begin our quest. And these people on Camera can open the way to the Shadowtech goddess at last. Camera. Stenibelle moved into position and listened. Indeed, Rodrigo said in a dreamy voice. Golden Camera. Immortal Camera. There, we can sit back in luxury and watch as all else is destroyed. There, we shall be masters of a new, properly conceived universe. These are the end of times we have strived for at long last, dear Captain. Let us head into Zaffin space and steal us some women there. They shall yield much faster. Well, unfortunately, we are a fleet ship and cannot just go into Zaffin space without due cause. And there's also the small matter of your friend, Camilla of Sarander, wanting to stick your head out on the mast of her ship. Bergen turned an angry shade of red. Yes, thank you for reminding me. Rem Deckard pointed at the silent Melazar of Caroline. What about her? She's a Zaffin, right? Why don't we sacrifice her? Because she is my personal tropist, Bergen replied. Melazar's finger stabbed him into bliss, and his voice strained. And I need her. How much more Shadowtech do you need? Rem Deckard asked. We're running out of crew. Then get me more. Many more. My casks must be overflowing. Duval set his cup down. My dear Bergen, this isn't Zaffin space. Here in the League, when reputable people turn up missing, they are indeed missed. Unlike the disposable K-list trash I have manning the ship now. Questions are asked. Investigations are launched. But, have no fear, more victims will soon be available. We'll have them by tomorrow. I shall wish to inspect them, Bergen said. We cannot harvest quality Shadowtech without victims of proper stock. Duval shrugged. If you must. I'll have my first take you down to the hold, and you may inspect those we capture for yourself. No. I do not trust your witch from Modron. She'll probably attempt to assassinate me along the way. You take me, Captain. Rem Deckard seethed and pulled a horrid, ugly knife from the interior of her coat. Would I do such a thing? Man from Bergen. Rodrigo yawned and pointed at an odd black box sitting near the windows. It looked like a large bird cage, paneled shut with slats of wood and tarred black. The box rattled a little. It seemed to smoke. Careful, woman. One word from my lips, and my Trempelar box will open, and you shall bear witness to the horrid wonders of Midas. It is my personal protection that I carry, and has served me well in the past. I assure you. Deckard glanced at the box and hesitated. I don't think anything's in there. You care to find out? Duval scowled. Enough. And I could, at a word, flood this entire deck in Vitrax gas, and have you and your tropist whore incapacitated in seconds. Let us compose ourselves for now and be reasonable. There shall be fitting time for chaos in the days to come. Vitrax. Another sickening wave of Cyril hit Stenibelle hard. Vitrax was an old fleet tactic used by ship captains who didn't trust their crews and were in fear for their lives. They would pump in a poisonous gas known as Veracensis Traxfornia into select areas of the ship, usually the bridge or their personal quarters. This gas was deadly to any not having been administered the antidote. Another variable she had to consider. Melazar's fingers quickened their pace. Bergen covered his mouth and groaned slightly. There she was, Melazar of Caroline, the key to Stenibelle's mission, the shield that would save her house, and she couldn't get to her with these cretins about. It was maddening. She had to do something. The little piece of her psyche that was still bunged up spoke with brutal clarity. Just kill the three of them and be done with it. Kill them? She supposed these three deserved it to some extent. After all, they were colluding to bring about the end of the universe. But how to do it? Stenibelle, despite her kills and arcane equipment, was no warrior. Her best advantage was stealth and surprise. She could probably kill one of them with her Grenville 40 or her Vuncula, but what about the other two? The captain was armed with a standard Mims pistol, a very small caliber weapon, but still lethal, and he could order the deck gassed with Vitrax poison on command. Bergen was a Zaffin warlord. He must have considerable martial skills at his disposal, and he had his arcane Trempelar box was intended to protect him from attack. And what about Rem Deckard? Her serial information listed her as extremely dangerous. What did that mean? Was she a warrior? Was she an assassin? Her capabilities were unknown. Stenibelle could kill one of them, but then have to deal with the other two. And what about Melazar herself? Would she be compliant? Would she cooperate? Would she be hostile? She was obviously drugged or in a deep trance. That would complicate matters as well. A 7-foot-tall, 300-pound female would be quite a handful. And then there were the crew, or what was left of them in the hold. Eliminating the captain or the first officer might trigger some sort of reprisal from the people on the bridge. They might panic and try to flee the League. They could jettison the crew or burn them or do any number of things. Given all this, killing them outright didn't seem a practical option. She had to maintain her stealth and remain unseen. She decided to disable them and try to get Melazar away from the area so she could figure out how to get the information out of her. Stenibelle noticed a fresh pot of tea brewing on a burner, the sweet fragrance of plums and blueberries drifting out. A thought crossed her head. Stenibelle pulled an ochre holystone from the depths of her HRN. The ochre holystone had been invented by her sister Virginia, of all people. Her husband, Maximilian Apol, sometimes had issues sleeping after eating too much of her wonderful cooking. He had a tender stomach and a tendency to bloat. The ochre holystone, full of herbs and stalks of select plants, was intended to settle the stomach, clear the bowels, and provide a sweet feeling of indifference. Virginia was never a great herbalist, and her ochre holystone worked a little too well, often making the user prone to flatulence and drunk with indifferent bliss, eventually passing out. She took 3 ochres, all she had, and silently dropped them into the tea. Then she backed away and waited. She had to be careful, as the fumes alone could lighten her head and dull her senses as well. She had to remain sharp. After a while, Bergen had finished his cup. "Woman," he said to Rem Deckard, "I would like some more tea." He held out his cup. "Would you be so kind? Let your bitch over there do it. She is royalty. You are a League peasant." Deckard stood up and seethed. "Captain, may I show him a few things about myself? I'm dying to." The room seemed to get a little hotter. Duval laughed and stood up. He took Bergen's cup. "Please be seated, Lieutenant. I'll get it." He went to the tea service and poured 3 fresh cups. Stenibelle sucked in her breath and watched. She could smell the slightly cloying scent of the dissolved ochres in the tea. She would have to observe carefully in spring when the time was ripe. She covered her mouth with her hand to avoid breathing in the fumes as much as possible. It shouldn't be long. 3 ochres should fire them right up. Duval returned to the table and they began drinking the tainted tea, all except for Melazar of Caroline, who remained in a lock-still trance. "I was inspecting the hold," Bergen said. "There are plenty of crew ready to be harvested." He slurped his tea. "The cargo is full of them. Those in Hold 1 are individuals who have family in influential positions, who donate money to the fleet with frequency, and who often inquire about their children under my command. We need them alive for now in case one comes calling." Bergen finished his tea and poured himself some more. "Such civilities are obsolete in these times, Captain. Their families are inconsequential, and as are your quaint efforts at maintaining appearances. Such considerations have no meaning at the end of all things. Duval took a drink. Yes, well, until we actually see some sort of results, I shall outwardly maintain the status quo and be an apparently loyal captain in the fleet. Until the time has come to unleash hell, I shall be a citizen of heaven in good standing. Rem Deckard stood up and removed her fleet coat. She fanned her face with her hand. A hot, flush sensation. That was one of the symptoms the ochre was taking effect. The room spun a little. The fumes were seeping into her head as well. Is it getting hot in here? Duval asked. If the engineer was still with us, I'd give him an earful. As they drank their tea, the comm rang in. Sir, long-range scans indicate a Zaffin freighter coming in 6:22 a.m. of 8:19 p.m. She's riding in the Gilman slot to avoid standard fleet detection. Duval motioned for Rem Deckard to come in, and she did. She unbuttoned his collar. Compliment? Duval asked as he unbuttoned her pants. A gross reduction in inhibition, yet another ochre trait. Stenibelle recalled the normally shy Virginia running nude through the gardens after an ochre session. The wet sounds of passionate kisses filtered up. Unknown, it appears to be a shipload of refugees, possibly from Woodward. Understood. File a false flight plan to the fleet and make our heading the Hedgepeth under the pretense of investigating suspected Zaffin traffic there. Meanwhile, send to navigation and plot a solution to intercept the vessel down the Gilman slot. Full communications blackout procedures in place. Send to helm. Make sail best possible speed. Time to intercept at full sail 3 hours. Excellent. Oh, he groaned a little. Keep me advised. He turned to Rodrigo as Rem Deckard licked his neck. See, dear Bergen, something always presents itself. An unregistered Zaffin transport just crying out for our attention is en route. And you have no fear of the fleet? Duval scoffed. Of course not. We're all one big happy group, are we not? We just filed a flight plan stating we shall be in the Hedgepeth. Therefore, where else would we be? No one is checking, for creation's sake, and with the speed of this class of ship, once we finish, we'll be there in no time, for verisimilitude's sake. As a matter of interest, dear Captain, what will you do once you intercept this unfortunate craft? Quite simple. We approach, we jam, we disable, we board, we take the women, we space the men. We destroy the ship using our custom-mounted Zaffin Crassagrain beams to make it appear as an enemy raiding action. Rem Deckard unbuttoned her shirt and removed her pants. She straddled Duval, and soon they were copulating right in front of Rodrigo, who watched with fury. He stumbled in and tried to insert himself into the situation. The three of them had faded into a squirming primal situation with Rodrigo, a pawing third wheel, trying to work his way in. They became consumed with their passions. It was time. Her head feeling a bit numb, Stenibelle got close to Melazar. Melazar's eyes snapped open and stared at her, though Stenibelle was still faded into the shadows. Her eyes were the most amazing color, yellowish-brown, flecked with gold, like a lion's eye, and she smelled like a baked dessert. Melazar struggled to speak. Stenibelle could smell herbs and tinctures on her breath. Bergen had her drugged with something potent. Stenibelle took Melazar by the hands. Melazar slid off the couch and stood up, her feet slapping on the tiles. She towered over Stenibelle. So far, she seemed compliant, in a drugged, childlike sort of manner. Her goal was to get Melazar out of the room, off deck 2, and somewhere deep into the ship where the coordinates to camera could be extracted in privacy. She led her away to the door, Melazar teetering a bit on the balls of her feet. It was tough sledding with Melazar's weight. It was like trying to move a block of iron around. Muh, she stammered. She leaned into Stenibelle, putting her arms around her, grabbing her, trying to get at her wrist. No, shh, Stenibelle said, trying to keep her quiet. As Melazar pawed at her, she tried the door and it was locked. Stenibelle couldn't turn the latch. It seemed to be frozen in place. She produced her lockpicks and went to work on the door. The lock wouldn't budge. She didn't understand. Why couldn't she get through? She sweated and felt confused. The fumes from the ochres were definitely affecting her as well. She was having trouble seeing properly. Why won't the damn door open? Melazar would not leave her alone, pawing and grabbing. Stenibelle took her by the hands and led her a few paces away. "Sit here, please," she said. Melazar seated herself on the floor, her long legs stretching out in front of her. Stenibelle noticed Melazar had a deep, ugly burn mark on her right shoulder blade. It was seared into her flesh, as if from a branding iron. Stenibelle set back to work. The damn lock still wouldn't budge. Stenibelle had never had issues like this with a lock before. What was the matter? Wait a moment. What had she been thinking? She had her trusty brown holy stones. She could get both her and Melazar out of the ship right now and be gone to the safety of planetfall. Once there, she could figure out how to extract the coordinates and then go to the professor or Lieutenant Gwendolyn and inform her of the doings on this ship and that the crew needed helping. Lieutenant Gwendolyn would take action. Lieutenant Gwendolyn would save the crew. Why hadn't she thought of it before? The fumes, they were certainly messing her up. She reached into her pockets to fetch them. She slapped at her HRM. "Where are creations or my holy stones?" she cried. They were missing from their pockets. She glanced at Melazar. Scattered all around her on the floor were various items from her HRN. Arcane danger detectors, papers, small boxes, and for the love of creation, there was Professor Sherlam's Unimine, and, like a collection of gumballs, were most of her holy stones. Melazar had effortlessly picked her pockets and emptied their contents to the floor like a master cut purse. "Gods, Melazar, what have you done?" Stenibelle scrambled and fitfully returned the items to her HRN. She reached for the Unimine, but Melazar snatched it away. "Muh, she grunted. Stenibelle had several holy stones in her hands, but she was having issues distinguishing color. Yet another effect of the ochres. Which ones were the brown ones? She couldn't determine the browns from the reds, from the greens, and the purples. They were fuzzy in her hand. Never mind. Take Melazar and flee. Get that door open. Shoot the doorknob off if you have to. Quit the ship later when her head had cleared. To her bewilderment, the Unimind sat before Melazar between her legs. Somehow she had accessed its holodesk. A lurid holographic keyboard hovered in front of her, complete with slides, glyphs, and side controllers. Melazar was typing away at fast speed, her long fingers a blur. She wasn't even looking at what she was doing. She was just keying in data, her fingers moving on their own. Lit up in holographics, a complex star chart was forming before Stenibelle's eyes, coming together in 3D complexity, complete with vectors, lines of force, AM/PM compass headings, planetary systems, nebular anomalies, and notable stars and stellar bodies. Map to camera, she stammered, a dazed grin on her face. Stenibelle was astounded. On her own, Melazar was yielding the information both she and Rodrigo Bergen so desperately needed. She watched her work. "The Merton will give you the information," Aram had said. The chart was nearly complete. "Melazar!" Just then, Rodrigo Bergen seized Melazar by the hair roughly, pulling her away. Like a scurrying spider, the Unimind closed up and headed back to Stenibelle at a run with its cargo of fresh data. It scurried up her leg and vanished into the depths of her coat. Grunting, Bergen and Melazar spun round and round. "Dance with me, Mel!" he cried. His pants fell to his ankles. Melazar's robe came away. They began having sex. Melazar, much bigger than Bergen. "Sir," the comm came. "Captain Duval, we are detecting high levels of a noxious gas in your quarters. Sir, are you all right?" The bridge crew had detected the vapors of her ochre holy stones. Things were falling apart. "We're sending a team to check on you." The bridge crew were proceeding. Duval, Deckard, Rodrigo, and Melazar weren't listening. They were deep into their orgy, everybody pounding away. Melazar, on all fours, continued to stare at Stenibelle. "Ma," she repeated as Bergen hammered her to the floor. Frustrated, she scooped up as many holy stones as she could, leaving a few rolling about. She tried the door one more time, and to her shock, it opened easily. Why couldn't she get it open before? She didn't have time to ponder. She exited just as the team from the bridge arrived and piled into the room. And with that, we conclude Chapter 8, Crew in Limbo. Kind of an interesting chapter, wouldn't you say? Stenibelle begins to feel sorry for the condition of Lady Lessa of Walpole. Starts wondering what's wrong with her, and doing a brief investigation sees that she seems to be bespelled with shadow tech, which is very toxic. She's got this funky tattoo cut into her left shoulder blade, and it's dripping with shadow tech, and her temperature is incredibly high, her heart rate is incredibly high. And as we eventually hear from the very convenient dialogue offered by Captain Duval, that she is a person of note and she's being kept on ice in the hole just in case her family comes looking for her, which is a possibility. Little expositional dialogue sometimes doesn't hurt. You gotta keep the plot rolling. And Stenibelle happens in on them in a convenient time when they're talking about just the various things that she needs to know. She sees Melazar of Caroline, and as typical in the Shadow Tech Ghost book, she's very tall and very heavy. And she's also giving Rodrigo Bergen his treatments of her Tropus skills, as I mentioned earlier. Stenibelle decide, and then here we go again. This is more wrangling to prevent a plot hole. More. So Stenibelle walks in there. She's invisible. They can't see her. So you think, well, the most pragmatic thing to do would just be to kill all three of them. She's got a gun. She can just shoot all three. Be done with it. Take Melazar of Caroline and do whatever to get the data. But if she were to do that, you just pull the gun out and pull the trigger, roll credits, end of story. We wouldn't have a story anymore. So I had to figure out a way to keep the story going and not hatch a massive plot hole. It's a constant struggle. So she starts musing, well, I'm not a warrior, which is true. Stenibelle is not, she's really not much of a fighter at this point. She's never really had cause to be one. So here she is, and she's got three potentially dangerous people in front of her. She's got Rem Deckard, that Hannah Ben Sherlamb even says, extremely dangerous. And we'll find out later in the story just how dangerous she can be. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. She's got Captain Duval, who has a gun himself. It's a little one, but a shot to the head will kill you just the same from it. And he can also, at a word, have the deck flooded with Vitrax gas. So all he has to do is say a word and Stenibelle's dead. She hasn't been inoculated or jabbed with the antidote to this Vitrax gas. So if he pumps it full, she's going to die. And then there's Rodrigo Bergen, who's an arcane Zaffin warlord. She suspects he might have some sort of martial skills, and he's got a Tremplar box. And a Tremplar box is a sort of like a bodyguard that these weird Zaffin people carry around. It's like a bird cage, and there's something inside of it, something rattling around. And it's supposed to be, if like Rodrigo Bergen falls into danger, whatever's in the box will come out and lay waste to whoever was giving him a hard time. Whether how effective these boxes are is unknown, but they have a fearsome reputation, and it's enough to even keep the likes of Rem Deckard in check, because she's kind of spoiling to put a hurting on him because they're not really getting along. But he's got this weird box with a big reputation, so Stenibelle's like, well, I could kill one of them, but then I have to deal with the other two, and then I could get if I don't kill Captain Duval, then Rem Deckard and can do who knows what to me, and then Rodrigo Bergen can open his Tremplar box and do horrible things to me. Or if I kill Rem Deckard, the captain can just flood the deck with gas. It goes on and on. Like, what do you do? Okay, I guess I really just kill all three of them. And that's really not who Stenibelle is. She's not a cold-blooded murderer. Killing somebody is farthest away from her mind. She's not going to do it. So then she's like, well, I'll just drug them with these ochre holy stones her sister Virginia created to help combat flatulence, which I thought was kind of funny. She sticks it into the tea, and it starts to release these fumes, and if you drink it, it's even more potent, and it has a number of effects. It makes you extremely euphoric with bliss, makes you uninhibited, and kind of just makes you high, basically. And so they're all three of them are super high on this stuff, and they start having an orgy. And let me tell you, my original publisher had a hard time with that. He wanted to, he says, this is pandering pornography. I'm like, yeah, I'm not pandering pornography. Really, get a life, get a grip, get a job, get a clue. Where's the porno? Where's the porno? Where's the porno? I'm not describing anything. I'm not talking about anyone's schlong or anyone's snatch or junk. I just say what they're doing, and I don't really describe it in any way, shape, or form. That is not porno. I'm sorry. Well, we had that argument, and it's in the past. Stenibelle tries to get Melazar out of there, but she finds that the door just won't open for whatever reason. We'll find out why she can't just get the door open. But then more plot hole coverage here. Okay, here's another problem that could just end the story right here and now. And I don't want it to end right here and now. I want it to continue. She's got the brown holy stones. Oh, she Melazar is her quarry, and there she is right in front of her. All she's got to do is crack her on the head with it. A black maiden will appear, and poof, she's gone to planetfall. And then all she's got to do is crack herself on the forehead. Poof, another black maiden, planetfall. End of story. Let's roll credits. So I'm like, okay, how do I defeat that? Put these things in here. Now they're becoming inconvenient, and some smart ass is gonna call me on it. So that's why I had Melazar sort of like pick her pockets and pull all of her stuff out, had it laying on the floor, and then Stenibelle, under the effects of her own ochre holy stones, is having trouble distinguishing color. I remember one time I got loaded drunk in college, and I remember I couldn't. It was like seeing everything in kind of a brown haze. I couldn't detect colors or anything. I don't know what was going on. I couldn't see squat. So I figured, okay, that will take care of that plot hole. Melazar takes all her stuff, and then Stenibelle, under the influence of her own ochre holy stone, can't see what color the holy stone is to use the right one. So she basically has to retreat the bridge crew starts detecting the fumes from her ochre holy stone. And so Stenibelle has to retreat, and as she finds that the door will just open inexplicably, we'll get to why that she couldn't open the door later. There's a reason for it. Not before Melazar creates a partial map to camera. So as promised, she is willingly giving the information that the universe has provided her to Stenibelle. She didn't have time to complete it, as Bergen pulled her into the orgy, and that was that. Next week, we continue Chapter 9, Saving the George Parr. So Stenibelle is going to get it in her head to help the crew. Stenibelle is a hero, and she's quickly growing into that role of the hero where she has to make tough decisions, right? Rey from Star Wars, who never had to make a tough decision in 3 freaky deaky poopy doopy movies. But Stenibelle's going to have to start making a series of tough choices that might be inconvenient to her and shape the rest of the story. And we will get to those next week. Yes, we will. Until then, this is Ren Presents. I am your host, Ren. Peace out.